Greetings and salutations, guys. This is my spoiler-free review of Daredevil Born Again, the entire season. I've seen all 9 episodes, so this will be my thoughts based on what is out there publicly before it debuts as far as the overall plot points, but nothing that will give away, any twists and turns that come along in the series. However, because this is embargoed until the first 2 episodes go live in Disney+, near the end of the video, I will give a spoiler warning, and then I will get into those first 2 episodes a lot, because I think there are some things about those first 2 episodes I do want to touch upon. I'll warn you, though, again, sufficiently beforehand, if you haven't seen those 2 episodes. So let's jump in with overall thoughts of a very long-awaited series. It's been 7 years since Daredevil Season 3 finished on Netflix, and I'm happy to say that I think overall, this is a very satisfying season. If you are a fan of Daredevil, if you're a fan of the Netflix Daredevil series, character Daredevil, I think this delivers. I think the big question will be, of course, well, is it as good as the Netflix series? Not yet, for the most part, but I think it shows how it definitely can be. There was a time when we didn't know if we'd ever see this version of these characters again. Then we started to see Daredevil and Kingpin pop up in some new shows, but there was still that question of, would the old canon from the Netflix series count? Would it ever be made sort of official under Kevin Feige, under Marvel Studios? And as has been very publicly talked about, this series, when it went into production initially, didn't really. It was very fast and loose with that stuff. It didn't have major connective ties to the past. And then they halted production because of the strikes. They were forced to, but that made them decide to do a huge overhaul and change up the creative team behind the scenes. Originally, it was Matt Corman and Chris Ord who were head writers. They replaced those guys with Dario Scardapane, who had written for the Punisher series, but he came in to kind of overhaul the entire season as showrunner. And they also brought in a couple of directors who they'd worked with before, which is Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who worked on Moon Knight and Loki, to kind of help guide the show. But it's tricky, right? Because they still kept a lot of the original footage. And so the way this works is episode 1 and 8 and 9 are brand new, but episode 2 through 7 include a mix of the footage shot originally and what they did in the reshoots. And a lot of what they did in the reshoots is, first off, bringing back a bunch of characters from the original series who were not in the original version of Born Again. So that includes Eldon Henson as Foggy, Deborah Ann Woll has Karen Page, Wilson Bethel has Bullseye. In one case, an interesting situation, because they brought back Ayelet Zuhur as Vanessa Fisk. Vanessa was always in Born Again, but because the actress hadn't been available the first time, originally they'd recast her, but now she was free now that they were doing this overhaul, and they brought her back. So when you're watching this, there's going to be a lot of people who watch this who don't know about these changes, and I'm curious how it'll play for them versus me and anyone else who's watching it who is aware that, they did this and that we're not watching a complete reshoot, we're watching this hybrid. I think it does show some of the seams, when you're watching it, that I think there is a bit of a clunkiness to it as they're trying to kind of mix and match these 2 different elements. I don't think it's completely derails the series. It's impossible not to wonder what season 2 will be like, which has already been greenlit under the new creative team, because you feel like that will be a much cleaner season, because that's going to be just their vision from the beginning, not trying to combine something that other people did before them. But what we get here is very good. It definitely continues the tone and the feel of Daredevil. And that's one thing they said that the overhaul was kind of leaning towards more, was let's bring back more of the dark, gritty tone from that original series. It doesn't feel one-to-one. It doesn't look exactly like it. It doesn't feel exactly like it, but it definitely feels like you're in the same realm. It does not feel like, oh, this doesn't match at all. This doesn't feel like the same Matt, the same Wilson Fisk. It feels like a continuation of these same characters picking up a few years later, but, new stories with them. And sometimes it can feel pretty dead on to the original. Sometimes it feels, like it's just a one step away. I think that when you look at the original series, season 3 to me was the benchmark, the high water mark. I think it's so great, followed by season 1. But I would say Born Again comes in after those 2 seasons, but it's better than season 2 of Daredevil, which I don't dislike like some people. I just think it's a messier season. I think this overall works a little better, clicks together more. Scardapane, Benson, and Moorhead have talked about wanting to retain that feel, wanting to retain how the fight scenes felt. And I think they've they've succeeded to a certain extent. You've got a fight scene like the one between Daredevil and Bullseye early on in the season that has the same overall vibe. And there's a hallway and a stairwell, but more importantly, the fact that it feels a little more real than other superhero fights are sometimes portrayed. And you see the exhaustion on these two guys. They're great fighters, but they are still giving their all to the point that it's hard for them to keep physically fighting. And I love that that's in there. I don't think that the best fight in Born Again Season 1 matches the best fights on the Netflix show. Again, I think that there is room for improvement on this series throughout. But what I got, I still really liked. It's still really delivered for me as a Daredevil fan. The other big weakness, though, I'd say about this series so far in comparison is the new supporting characters, which at once upon a time was pretty much all the supporting characters until they brought back people from the original show. But they lack depth, a lot of them, unfortunately. And it's a lot of, good actors with potential with their roles, but I just don't think we get to know them as well as we could. So we've got people like Nikki M. James as Kirsten McDuffie, who is a friend and a legal colleague of Matt Murdock, or Sabrina Guevara and Artie Froshin, who both play associates of Wilson Fisk in different ways. They get a lot of screen time. I just don't think we get to know the characters as well as we could. You also have Margarita Levieva, who plays a pretty large role as Heather Glenn, and she's a new love interest for Matt. Unfortunately, I just didn't feel a lot of chemistry between these two, and I don't think that storyline works as well as it could for that reason. I will say, with several of the supporting characters that I felt needed more, the last couple of episodes give you some better aspects about them, some intriguing aspects that did make me think, okay, there's more here to these characters. I think it could have been done better as far as layering it in earlier in the season, but it did make me happy to see a couple of them, kind of pop up in a way they hadn't before. I think better served is Michael Gandolfini as Daniel Blake, who is a very eager young employee of Wilson Fisk. And, I mentioned earlier she was in Daredevil since season 1, but I really love what they do with Ayelet Zeror as Vanessa Fisk, how her relationship with Wilson Fisk has developed, where we left off with her in Daredevil season 3, where she was kind of brought in fully into all of his, crime business, and where we find her now. Really cool and interesting through line of this entire season. It's no secret that this season takes a lot from the Mayor Fisk storyline from the comics, where the Kingpin becomes the mayor of New York. And I do think, that gives him a lot to work with here. Vincent D'Onofrio, always a great actor, but where Wilson Fisk is and how this changes things for him, having this new position of power, that is a very intriguing element of the season, and how he reacts to it, and how he has to deal with new obstacles he's not used to, but how he, being the man he is, how he's going to react to those obstacles. Here's where I get political for a moment and just say, look, it was funny before Captain America Brave New World or Daredevil Born Again came out, how it was like, oh, interesting timing for two stories about politicians with kind of ominous overtones. But in a way, this is the one that plays even more like, whoa, this feels way more topical than they could have ever known when they were making this show, either version of this show, because the reshoots, were, I think, like last summer. Yeah, I'll just say, seeing a story about a lifelong criminal / businessman who becomes a very powerful politician and now decides that he is going to do things his way, and how that goes and the decisions he makes, there are some interesting parallels that are not subtle. And again, not intended, I think. I mean, maybe they've intended them a little bit when they were making it, but in no way did they know it was going to be this, on the mind of people. How your administration is run and what you bring to it. There's definitely some moments that feel very interesting as you're watching this show. Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio remain just impeccable casting as these two characters. They have always fit like a glove. They continue to. They are barely on screen together, but when they are, you feel this great, sense of the history between the two of them and this rivalry. I think the creators have even talked about, leaning into the fact that it's like they need each other in their own sort of sick, messed up way. They have that sort of heat diner scene that you've seen in a lot of the trailers where they sit together and just talk. and the sort of, no one says we're not so different, you and I, but they have this like almost that vibe behind it, while it's like a respect on some level after all this time, but also this hatred of who the other person is, what they represent, and how different they are as well. And I really like that. I really love watching them play these characters. I like how the season incorporates Muse, who is this sadistic and sort of horrific serial killer from the comics. He is suitably creepy when he pops up. And then there's the Punisher, who is not in the season a lot, but when John Bernthal does appear, he's as great as you remember him to be, and his character definitely leaves an impression, as always. Some of this season does echo, no pun intended, to another MCU character connected to Wilson Fisk, but it echoes Daredevil Season 3, which was the season that loosely, was an adaptation of the Born Again comic book storyline. And we begin this season with Daredevil having, with Matt Murdock having quit being Daredevil. And we have to kind of build back to when will he become Daredevil again? And there's some other parallels that continue later on in the season. So it feels like we're kind of in territory we've covered before. And I think that is one thing that stops Matt's story from being as compelling as Fisk's, even though I love Charlie Cox playing this character. And I think there's some nice material with him as a lawyer, which we didn't get a lot of in a lot of the later seasons of the show. I do think Matt is out of the Daredevil costume for too long this season, especially considering the fact that he barely wore it in Defenders, and he didn't wear it at all in Daredevil Season 3. I mean, he wore that kind of very low-tech black gear, but he didn't wear like the red Daredevil suit. So you want to see him back in that suit. It takes too long to get him there. But the fight scenes, both in and out of the suit, are they're very fun on their own terms, even if they're not living up to the original series. There was one episode involving a bank heist that I think is a real standout. It's just like a fun, mostly standalone adventure. I was really glad to have that, and some other stories that happen here that feel like 1 or 2 episode arcs, because the Netflix series felt so concentrated, like ultra 13 episode serialized stories, sometimes forgetting that you can have like a cool, fun, standalone superhero story. And this series, I think, touches upon that a little better in its sort of mini arcs throughout. And then the action, it is fun. It is dynamic. Sometimes it can't measure up to what we saw before, but don't worry. Just like the original series, there are moments that will have you wincing as people's bodies react to terrible things happening to them. Man, there is one act of violence near the end of the season that I was actually shocked was included. It goes very far. Once in a while, I felt a little bit like, man, they really want to be edgy here. I think the place I thought it the most was with the use of F-bombs, which I use liberally in my own life, but I don't think they ever said them on the Netflix series. I don't think that word was ever used, even as dark and edgy as that show was. They say it so much on the show. Every character says it so much that it does feel like they're like, all right, Deadpool gave us the freedom. We can do this. And a couple times I feel like maybe they should have done less is more. Because a couple of them are really great. And I felt like, oh, but they've said it so much at this point. Oh, well. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed being back in this world, back with these characters. And it is funny to say, and I'm even more excited for season 2. But I think that's due to what was probably a bit of an unavoidable clunkiness to the season, and the fact that you can feel the Frankenstein nature of it at some points. But feeling like the people that are running it do have a confidence to them. The finale is really strong, while also hugely cliffhangery, setting up into what's going to be season 2, which is already underway, which is great. Because it makes me think, okay, now they've gotten through a very strange situation, and I want to see what they're going to do with season 2. Now I want to get into spoilers for those first 2 episodes, which are now out on Disney+. So if you haven't seen them, you can go watch them right now. Are you still with me? Have you seen those 2 episodes, or you don't care about spoilers? All right, let's go for it. Let's talk about the death of Foggy. Pretty predictable based on the trailers and it wasn't that hard to be a detective and kind of note his absence and note interviews talking about a very sort of dark, sad thing happens, and Charlie Cox saying, I don't know if it was the right move, I was questioning it, and kind of come to the conclusion, it doesn't seem like things are good for Foggy here. And yeah, he's taken out so quickly. it did make me wish we got a full episode with him. And again, I understand it's like they have to aim. I'll get in a second to the fact they're aiming towards the stuff they already shot. But because the first episode was all new material, I thought, could they have structured this differently to not just have it be the prologue and to get a little bit more of an idea of the day-to-day of, Matt, Foggy, and Karen running their law firm? Because we only saw them start it at the end of Daredevil Season 3. It's great to know that it's been up and running for a few years and they're doing well. But we don't get to spend that time with them. We get the one scene in the bar, and then that's it. It's a bummer. And watching into the second episode, it's like, okay, this is where you can really feel the reverse engineering, I feel, right? Because you think about the White Tiger trial, and it's like, okay, so Matt's law partner is Kirsten. Foggy and Karen are nowhere to be seen. And this was the original footage, right? This was the stuff that was always there. And so I felt like, you can feel that they had to reverse engineer. They had to explain where are Karen and Foggy. And who knows, in the original version, were they dead anyway? There were some rumors, but that might have just been fan speculation. Both of them, there was some rumors that they were both dead. First of all, very glad they didn't do that. But second of all, it's like, all right, because they didn't throw out the old footage and they wanted to use this, now they had to explain it all. And I don't know, it's a hard call, because I'm not saying a character should be untouchable, but there is something about not getting that dynamic again, even for a full episode, that is a bummer. And then Karen's gone too, and I think it's safe to say that Deborah Ann Woll, will return at some point on this series, but you just have to make that shift into like, all right, this is the new dynamic, and of course that's going to be part of the storyline. But yeah, there is a part of me that wishes they could have figured out a different way in. At the same time, I like seeing Matt with this trial, the White Tiger storyline, the idea that there are more vigilantes running around New York and that Matt is defending him. I think that works really well. And by the way, I will say, this many years in, as a comic book geek, it was so great just to hear Vincent D'Onofrio playing the Kingpin mention Spider-Man. He didn't say the name Spider-Man, but we knew who he was talking about. What he's talking about. Can't remember the exact line about someone in a spider suit or whatnot, or dressed as a spider. It was great just to have that character acknowledged at all, because it's the MCU and he would be a pretty prominent vigilante in New York for someone who is ranting about vigilantes. But second of all, if you know the history of the comics, where Spider-Man and Kingpin were foes before Daredevil was even a part of the Kingpin storyline. It was a funny shift where Kingpin was introduced in Spider-Man, and then years later he kind of shifted over and became Daredevil's main foe, but he also still fought Spider-Man. They've never met on screen. Hopefully that can still happen at some point, but at least the mention happened here. Is it funny to hear Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock mention a mystic amulet? To use the phrase mystic amulet, sure. But I think it's the kind of thing that we kind of have to shift into, because he is part of the MCU, and he has already met Peter Parker and knows about Spider-Man, and at some point he might be in an Avengers movie, who knows. So it's funny because the Netflix shows were grounded, and there were superpowers, but they were pretty damn limited. And so when you have him just mention something casually like that, it'll be a little funny. But I think that's, you got to rip the Band-Aid off, guys. He is part of this larger world, even if this show is going to contain things a little more. And I think that's the fun of it, right? That's why I loved him going to She-Hulk, because I didn't think he was acting out of character. I thought we saw him the lighter side of Matt. Yet I still think he acted like Matt Murdock, it's like, and the way he fought was like Daredevil. We just saw, hey, he's looser, he's lighter. He was in a better headspace in his She-Hulk appearance. Then he went back to his own show, and things are very dark and gritty and intense, and that's the way it should be. But if he's ever going to if he's gonna like actually swing around the city with Spider-Man at some point, and I want that, he has to be able to talk about mystic amulets. And there's a lot of crazy things out in this universe. So that's all I'll say about now. I don't want to start to telegraph more about what happens in the episodes after episode 2. But just to say, R.I.P. Foggy. It is a bummer, even as much as I expected it. I am really glad that Bullseye is back, and if someone was going to kill Foggy, it's someone who has that history and is another arch nemesis of Matt's. That felt appropriate, and you'll see. I think it's not giving away anything also to say you see Bullseye again, because there's a shot of him in the trailer that is not in these 2 episodes. But yeah, it is an interesting mixing of the elements with the old and the new. And if they had started from scratch, if they truly started from scratch, maybe they would have made a lot of different decisions as far as why is Matt not even Daredevil anymore. They were kind of stuck with that storyline, and they wanted to have a big reason, and Foggy was the reason, but that's sad. All right. Those are my thoughts on the first two episodes, but also Daredevil Born Again overall season. I have pre-recorded while I was watching the episodes and I hadn't gone ahead. I did individual episode reviews, so I could speculate and it would be clean. It would be untouched by my knowledge of what was to come. So you'll be seeing those, and sometimes I would think I'm way off, like predicting things or thinking something's happening that's not. So that'll be fun. Probably not that fun for me. Maybe for you, though. If you can like and subscribe, that'd be great. And thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you next time.